Namaste all, and welcome to our continuing evenings with Sraddhalu. Tonight's very important subject is justice denied. Sraddhalu will begin with quotes from Sri Aurobindo and then look into the systems in India and America. Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste Narad, and welcome to everyone who is online. The theme today is somewhat different, although a continuation of our current affairs. We have spoken earlier of how the cabal hides itself most easily inside the security systems and particularly the intelligence communities within a country, because that is the most natural hiding space where officially, legally, and with all the goodwill of the country, you can get away with anything, with any kind of funding, do what you like, and be accountable to nobody in the name of national security. And as a result, that's where eventually all these secret powers that want to escape accountability will tend to gather. But that is not the only place. There are other spaces in all governance structures where also power gathers. Generally speaking, wherever there is power, there is a tendency for more power to gather there. Because those who want power will come there, seize upon that power or try to seize upon it, and then build more and more powerful structures. You can come and break the power structure and it will again recoalesce around natural power centers. So in a sense, you cannot avoid that, but there are ways you can limit misuse by being transparent. But there's another space, which is of course political power, where it's obvious. As you can see, there are lineages of families who actually dominate entire political spaces and ensure an entire country or a state or a city, and sometimes spaces within cities, are under their grip for generations together. There is the deep state that we have spoken of, which is different from the cabal, and in that there are entrenched interests over time that have accumulated, and generally the bureaucracy is a good center for the deep state to work through. But we have not so far touched upon one of the focal points of power, which is the judiciary. The judiciary is intended to interpret the law, to ensure that justice is given according to the law, according to the constitution, which the elected representatives of people are supposed to have formulated. They are not supposed to formulate the law, they are only supposed to interpret. And yet, in time, they also accumulate powers. I give an example here. In India, for example, there was a recent study which found that something like 80% of the judges or people working in the judicial system, that could be anything from the court clerks through to the registrars, through to lawyers or peons within the legal system, 80% of them are related to former judges or lawyers. So it's almost as if the system tends to promote its own favorites to come to power. I'm poor with remembering numbers, but if I remember right, more than nearly a dozen judges or Supreme Court or High Court judges were children of former Supreme Court judges or High Court judges. And that shows you that it's not on the strength of their competence alone, but on the influence that the name carries or the family carries, that many of these promotions take place. Be that as it may, if it led to good justice, it would be fine, except that we find the accumulation of power naturally leads to misuse also. And the misuse in this case in the judiciary can be of two kinds. There is four kinds if we have to be accurate. First is opportunistic, where you have a chance, you do what you can. The second is from shared values. And we see this often when there are strong religious interests or ideological interests. A judge who is leftist will tend to protect leftist ideology, leftist interests, Marxist leaders, even those who involved themselves in terrorism will be protected by a judge who is leftist. And there are shared values which bind them. Third is a kind of an indebtedness. They may be indebted because of early support from various political interests or other financial interests, or, which is more and more commonly the case both in the judiciary as well as in the bureaucracy, they are owned. And this, I share some insights I gained from people who are in the system, who are in the judicial system or in the political system or the bureaucratic system. And it's been quite an enlightening in series of conversations I've had with people. One of the things which stands out from there is that very early on, as soon as you've entered into the, let's say, bureaucratic system or the legal system, there are interests which are watching who are potential leaders for the future and who are amenable to their influence. So if they find someone who is a potential leader, they will try to connect with them early on and make them amenable to their interests. And as it turns out, there are powerful families, or sometimes it is parties, inevitably backed by families generally, which then ensure your promotion if you align with their interests. So very quickly, you are as if owned by X or Y company or business family or political family. And if you're aligned ideologically, all the better. So in this case, they are outright owners, and if they are outright owned, or they are puppets to owners, which can become deep state or cabal owners. What happens in practice, in time, over generations, is the cabal interests from their core behind the scenes extend themselves using the deep state interests and other alliances to forge these connections. They ensure that their ideology gets promoted. I give an example here which is openly discussed by people like George Soros and their Open Societies Foundation, as well as the World Economic Forum founders who speak about this quite openly, where they say that they hack the system. Technically, they are not doing something illegal. They are promoting people, they're funding people, they're ensuring their promotions by various means, technically legal, but it's using a lot of personal influence. And they ensure that their people come to power. So judges typically, politicians typically. I remember it was the founder of the World Economic Forum who made a public statement at one point before they came under more open scrutiny that 80% of Canadian politicians were owned by them. It's the same man who also declared their objective to hack humanity by hacking power structures. George Soros similarly has spoken of how they have, through their Open Societies Foundations and others, promoted certain individuals and ensured that at a very low level in the power structure, in the hierarchy of bureaucracy, they put their people in. And then over the years, these people grow and they ensure that they are grown and promoted more with greater opportunity. So in this way, over time, they own the system because all these people are beholden to them. They know that they can be in position only because of this. The recent Supreme Court judge, who is, when he became Supreme Court judge, actually openly said that if not for the fact that he was a scheduled caste, he would not have been in this position. And to me, that was very troubling. It meant he was openly saying that it was not on the basis of competence. Of course, it can be interpreted the other way, that he's prevented from getting promotions by the system. But really, it's obvious statement saying that this is what it is. And you can see how the media promoted him on the basis of this scheduled caste identity as well as his religious identity, which was supposed to be Buddhist. But it's not really Buddhist as a follower of Buddhism. It is more in the Ambedkarite Buddhism, which is a revolt against Hinduism. And it was not really a belief so much in the Buddha or his teaching, or even a practice. So there are peculiar identities with which these individuals promoted and protected inside the system tend to attach themselves to. And by so attaching, compromise the integrity of the system itself. And this is one of the problems with the whole system of reservation, for whatever reason one may have justified it. So I'm giving this first as a background before we enter into the theme proper. In India, the judiciary has been hacked going back 70 years. In the United States, similarly. And I want to show examples of how this hacked system is being activated by the cabal to ensure that the elected governments which are not under cabal control cannot exercise their rights or can be overridden. The same thing is happening within Europe also. I don't know if you're aware, in Romania, one of the so-called anti-cabal politicians who spoke up against cabal interests, who got voted as Prime Minister on the ground that he was standing for freedom from cabal interests and from the European controls, was actually dismissed by a judge who was a cabal judge and backed by the European Union. The judge dismisses him after he is elected, demands and orders fresh elections in which this person is prevented from standing for elections. On what grounds? Legally none, but on technicalities invented by the judge on the grounds of statements made by him. And on that basis, the media had equally a frenzy against him, saying, oh, this man believes in flying saucers, he believes in spiritual things. And on that ground, he was also tarnished. And then they ensured that the people who could sit for being re-elected were all under their cabal control. And this is just an example how the judiciary can be used. Romania is relatively small compared to India and the United States. Nevertheless, it's exactly the same structure. And we see this across all European countries, but it has not been so blatant except in this case. In other cases, because largely the countries are under control of cabal, they didn't have to activate the judicial system. Romania is a good example recently. Israel recently had problems, and India and US currently, because they have prime ministers or presidents who are not under cabal control, the judiciary has been activated in a major way to block all steps that the non-controlled governments are taking. So before I come to that, I want to first look at what Sri Aurobindo has to say about the judicial system as well as the idea of law. I'm going to read from several texts of Sri Aurobindo, but many of these are actually from a time where it was still under British rule, and Sri Aurobindo is making comments about these things. So let's go with the first of these. Just a minute. Okay, so first article is titled British Justice in 1907, Sri Aurobindo is writing. There has been much to edify and instruct in the recent antics of the bureaucracy, and in the light of the object lessons they represent, the people of India have been revising old ideas and outworn superstitions with a healthy rapidity. The belief in British liberalism, in the freedom of the press, in the freedom of the platform, in the Pax Britannica, the peace that England supposedly retains worldwide, in the political honesty of Mr. John Morley and many other cherished shibboleths have departed into the limbo of forgotten follies. But the greatest fall of all has been the fall of the belief in the imperturbable impartiality of British justice. Now, you will see in what he describes how true and how relevant these observations are today also. He says, there are two kinds of strain which no empire, however firmly bound in triple and quadruple bands of steel, can long bear. So you might have an empire. Well, in the United States, it was a after the British Empire, you had the Soviet Union Empire, you had the China Empire, which is barely starting, but in between you had the United States Empire, basically a global domination as global policemen. And it is a different form of empire, more economic, less obviously politically dominating. But just the fact that you have American military living in your country to protect you, it's a kind of an empirical extension, just done in different vocabulary. So all these empires, and the British Empire fell, collapsed, eventually broke apart. So, but what he's observing now applies for all these, including today and including China today. They can be firmly bound in triple or quadruple bands of steel. What that is, even it's a suggestion, you can think about it. So, two things which no empire can survive, two strains. The strain of a burden of taxation which the people no longer find bearable, and the strain of a series of perversions of justice which destroy all faith in the motives of the governing authorities. So, perversion of justice and burden of taxation. These are the two things which can break an empire. Think about the implications. Remember, Sri Aurobindo here is also a master of, he is a master of administration. He has not just in this life demonstrated that, but also he carries the knowledge of something much larger and across many eons. But with that knowledge, he's telling you these are two things. Think about the implications, think about how it works today, and you will find many interesting consequences. But now he's focusing on justice. So, justice and protection between man and man, between community and community, between rulers and ruled, is the main object for which states exist, for which men submit to the restrictions of the law and to an equitable assessment of the expenses of the machinery which provide for protection and justice. Very interesting insight. Why don't we all just say, hey, I'm not going to care about the law? Not merely out of fear of going to jail because the law will come and imprison you. If enough of us stand up and we say, no, this is not going to work, we refuse. What can you do? This was in fact the structure, the strategy that Sri Aurobindo followed to force the British to quit India by going into the organized boycott. And his point was, you do what you like. We are going to build our own country. We are going to build our own systems. We are going to build our own education and social values and our own protection of our own people. We'll bypass you completely. That was the approach that Sri Aurobindo took, which Gandhi largely built upon, but then took it off track. So, why do you say, all right, we will acquiesce, even though you may not always agree with what is imposed on you? And here is the explanation. Implicit to that acquiescence of the machinery of governance is that the machinery is supposed to protect you. For what? Protection between you and others, between community and community, your community and another community, and particularly between rulers and ruled. The machinery is supposed to protect you from being exploited by the rulers. And these are the main object, and this justice and protection is the main object for which states exist. You remove this, the state has no meaning. For which men submit to the restrictions of the law. We agree to submit to all these laws, even if we don't agree with all the laws in their detail. Because the people who make the laws are not necessarily aligned to our values. Or in this case, we have inherited laws from the British, which may be completely alien to our values. We agree to conform to them despite that. Why? Because of this. And more than that, we pay the machinery to harass us. Think about that, isn't it? Why? Because supposedly it is going to offer us this justice and this protection. If it doesn't, then somewhere we say enough. But if the assessment of the expenses is grossly unjust, now we say we are paying too much. We are not getting what we are due to get for all that we pay. But it has to be gross. It has to be really dramatically more. Then it hits you hard. If it's slightly more and slightly more, you don't notice. So this is the game used in Europe. They kept raising taxes. They kept raising things until what I recently discovered, something like nearly 80% of what you own is taken away by the state. And what does it give you back in return when you actually retire? Practically nothing. I recently gave an example some months ago, so I don't repeat that. But it was so horrible. In this case, a man who has for 50 years grown an orchard with the best fruits, he's told, you have to sell it off, otherwise you will not get your pension. And just to ensure that you don't have independent income from the orchard, you have to destroy all the trees in order to get your pension. It is so perverse. And it's intentional. But this is the point where people start rebelling. And what I saw in France was the rebellion was taking the form of, I'm going to leave this country. It's still not overthrowing, but you can see how the pressures are growing. So, if the assessment of expenses is grossly unjust, if the expenses themselves are exorbitantly high, if the revenue is spent on ways of which the taxpayer do not approve, then protection and justice are bought at a price which is not worth paying. So think of it as you paying the price for buying protection and justice from the state. At what point do you say it's not worth it? And if in addition the protection is denied and the justice withheld, then the very object of the existence of a state ceases to be satisfied. So you keep giving the money, but you don't get anything in return in terms of protection or justice. And from that moment, the governing power, unless it can retrace its steps, is doomed by the inevitable operation of nature. So it's going to happen. And this is what I'm pointing to as the example in France. At some point, you are going to have a rebellion. What form it will take is to be seen. I expect something much larger. I'm just speaking of France because those were examples I saw closely. I expect something similar across Europe. What happened in Romania was one small example. Similar things happening in Hungary, where people being elected are openly speaking up against the cabal interests that control the European Union. And hopefully this will happen soon across all the countries in Europe, unless it can retrace its steps. That also happens. What happens, the strategy used by the cabal, when somebody has caused enough damage, Justin Trudeau, for example, he's done enough damage, there's too much pressure, he steps down, somebody else replaces him. Or with a fresh face, you're told, hey, now have patience, you will get what you want. And then it takes a few more years. And then again, he's replaced, someone else comes. That's the game played. And even about this, Sri Aurobindo will be talking about. We'll see shortly. So, the bureaucrats who misgovern us at the present moment have totally forgotten these simple truths. While he's speaking of the British rule at that time, you can see how it applies even today. Otherwise, we would not have witnessed such scandalous scenes as are now being enacted at Rawalpindi, or the gross infringement of equity and justice which are of frequent occurrence in Bengal. You could have said this today as 100 years ago in Bengal, at least. Rawalpindi also. I don't know enough of what is happening, but that's within Pakistan of today. The amazing incidents of the Rawalpindi riot case, are such as have hardly been paralleled in British India. The refusal of bail, which was the first scandal, has evidently become a part of bureaucratic policy. It is a sound principle of procedure that bail should not be refused except under exceptional conditions, such as the probability of the accused absconding. Otherwise, in a protracted case, an innocent man may suffer seriously for the sole offence of being accused. So this was the system earlier under British justice. You are accused, you are put in jail. Oh, we are going to have a trial, don't worry. The trial will take 6 months, no problem. But you sit in jail meanwhile. And after maybe 6 years or 10 years after the trial, you're told, hey, wait, it turns out you're actually not guilty, so you're free to go. What happens to the 10 years of life? Interestingly, this was the condition in India until recently. How did it change? When the then Chief Minister of New Delhi was arrested in case of open corruption, the evidence was so obvious that they could not prevent the arrest, although the Supreme Court tried. When it was shown the evidence, they said, okay, he has to be arrested. And subsequent to that, several of his deputies, the second, third, fourth in command, all of them were in jail on corruption charges. This is done by the CBI, Indian Investigative Agency, which is across federal, it's federal. So, and it's done all the evidence thoroughly. After these people are in jail for several months, the Supreme Court says, well, you know what, the case is not going to come up for your hearing for many more months, and it will take a long time because you have 500 documents, 5,000 documents of material, and it will take a long time to do this. So meanwhile, you can have bail. Interestingly, all these years, this was never the case until the judges' affinity and ideological alignment with the politicians came in the picture. And that's when the Supreme Court Chief Justice suddenly announces that bail should be always the case, and putting someone in jail should be the exception. After 70 years, interestingly. Though I agree with the principle, and that's what Sri Aurobindo is speaking here, but it was never done before until this case. And subsequently, those people were released, although the corruption had been proved, just because it's going to take time to go through trial, and the trial has never begun. And it will drag on for decades, and you never know what will happen. It just as an example, in the case of the riots that took place when Indira Gandhi was assassinated. And in New Delhi, there were riots where the official Congress party leaders were involved. And this is on video camera, on photographs. And so one can even say it openly, though we don't mention names. And the judges deferred the case's hearing, and he deferred until most of the people died. Recently, there was another hearing, and again it got deferred. And that's the way the system works, to protect its own. So they will never go to jail. That's what it means, even though it is proved that they are corrupt and the evidence is complete. So this is what you're seeing here. Bail should be the norm. Yes, agreed. Otherwise, you just take somebody and put him in jail and say, hey, wait. Nevertheless, it is under Supreme Court orders itself that this is still happening. So, for example, if there is a case where somebody makes a charge, a woman makes a charge of dowry against a husband or family, the police comes to the house and arrests you and puts you in jail. That's it. There's no question of bail. And the system is set like this. But when it serves their own, it's a different system. When it serves others, you're common people, you don't count. So you have to suffer. And this is the situation generally across the country. I know of this for a real case of somebody that I know. His wife left the house. She had exclusive access to the safe in which her jewelry was kept. She took her jewelry with her. Her sister was a lawyer in the Supreme Court. And then they filed a case. Now your lawyer fees are zero. They filed a case of dowry. And the police came looking to arrest the man and his family members. Just like that. And there was no mechanism. There was no way to protect yourself. You would just go to jail and you can say nothing about it. And that's the system. Why? Because the politicians and the judges are eager to prove that they're here to protect the women. To protect the women, you have to harass the men no end and ensure that if they try to harass, they don't get a chance by exaggerating the balance. So the moment you've tilted justice in one direction to prove a social point of your greatness, of your superiority for political or other interests, you've distorted the law. And it's no more equal, and the consequences are terrible. And there's so many cases now coming up of fake charges of dowry harassment that recently the Supreme Court judge said, you should not accept such fake cases of dowry harassment. But they're the ones who set the laws in this way. It's a combination of the judges and the politicians. So I have digressed, but you see how these observations of Sri Aurobindo at that time are applicable today. I'm skipping a few lines, and he gives the example of how things were happened. They were declared guilty and refused bail. This is British law and British justice. He gives more examples of how it happened. I'm going to skip a large part. Okay. Now I come to a portion where he says, but the most glaringly paradoxical, unsound case of all has occurred in our own midst. Srijut Girindranath Sen received at the hands of British justice a sentence of monstrous severity for a trifling offence. The same British justice, being moved to set aside the conviction and sentence, was graciously pleased to give the accused a chance of disproving the offence, but at the same time, in the plenitude of its justice and wisdom, refused to give him bail. In other words, it admitted that the accused might be innocent, but at the same time decided that he must undergo a monstrously disproportionate punishment for a trifling offence, of which it was admittedly doubtful whether he ever committed it. And then, when the punishment had been served out, British justice lent a graciously and leisurely ear and admitted that this Swadeshi volunteer captain was very probably innocent. But as he had suffered punishment for his innocence, it was not necessary to go any further into the matter. This too is British law and British justice. So I'm skipping this. It's a lot of sarcasm that he uses, but in this way, Sri Aurobindo was awakening people to the reality of what was happening. He ends the article with a humorous turn. For our part, we are ready to acclaim British justice with hymns of adoration and praise. Hail thou, ineffable, incomprehensible, indescribable, unspeakable British justice. Hail thou, transcendent mystery. Tubhyam bhuyishtham nama uktim vidhema. We bow down to he's taking a verse from the Sanskrit address to the sun god. Now, we come to another article where again he takes up this topic of British justice. I'm going to skip this one and go to the third. Okay, this is more important. So this is called the balance of justice. There are many articles. So I had to select 3 or 4 which I think are most poignantly perceptive and relevant to us. So this is called the balance of justice, and it is written sometime in 1910-11. The European Court of Justice is a curious and instructive institution. Now, this is generally he's speaking of Europe. Europe, even while wanting a monopoly of civilization, cherishes and preens herself in some remarkable relics of barbarism. So again, many interesting insights. Europe wants to have monopoly of civilization. So effectively, in their worldview, from the fact that Europe became civilized, the world became civilized. And all the rest of the world was not civilized before. And once Europe became civilized, they brought civilization elsewhere. So it's an interesting problem that the whole of so-called modern human history has been reduced to the civilization of Europe and its emergence from barbarism, which for them effectively is only after post-Christian era. So anything before that, if it is shown to be civilized, has to be brought closer to their dates so that they can be the originators of the civilization. So this is one of the reasons why Indian history has been so badly mauled by British historians, because they can't accept that 8,000 years ago straight away, they were organized cities with very organized administrative systems and laws, etc. So all those things had to be compressed, and anything which was such had to be turned into a myth. So Rama's existence is a myth, Krishna's existence is a myth, because that means civilization was already developed before Christian era and far higher than even what happened in Europe. So it has to be turned into a myth. A myth means not real, it's a symbolic story. In India though, because you've been taught from childhood, oh, this is a myth, mythology, we have understood mythology, the word, to mean ancient history. So Indians will say, yes, Rama is mythology, but what they mean by that is ancient history, not modern history, that's all. But that's not what the European means. So you have to be very clear about that. They have the monopoly of civilization. And yet, he says, they keep relics of barbarism. In medieval times, with the scientific thoroughness and efficiency which she shares with the Mongolian, interesting observation, she organized torture as the most reliable source of evidence, and the ordeal of battle as the surest guide to judicial truth. So if you want to find out what is true, then we have to battle it out. You and I say this, you say that. All right, let's fight it out. Because the one who is speaking the truth will win. Or rather, the one who wins becomes the true speaker. Interesting, isn't it? And yet, this is the reality of European cultural values. And is the basis of their judicial system also to a great extent. And the other thing is organized torture as the most reliable source of evidence. So, let's have the best evidence. We will torture you until you declare what the truth is. Shri Aurobindo comments on this. Both ideas were characteristically European. You don't find this anywhere else in the world. A later age may seem to have got rid of these luminous methods, but it is not so in reality. So he's saying today we don't do that so obviously, but actually it's not changed. In place of the rack, the French have invented the investigating judge, and the Americans some remarkable processes which I think they call questioning, the old name for torture. Questioning in the first, second, and up to the fifth degree, if not to higher stages of excellence. So you see a lot of sarcasm, but the French had this system of the rack, which is your body was placed on a bed, your hands and legs were tied, and then there were wheels which were turned to stretch your arms and legs until, or sometimes your body was bent, until your bones began to crack and break. And the pain of that is so extreme, so agonizing. Pretty much by the time you've got through a few centimeters of stretch, you will accept anything and give evidence to anything. So this was the system used in Europe during the Inquisition, where the church would basically catch anybody who was not following their agenda and say, oh, you are following the devil, and speak up and tell the truth. So if you say, but I'm not, then they say, all right, we'll extract the truth from you. And they would put you on the rack or other torture mechanisms, basically push you into such pain that eventually, just to end the pain, you would say, all right, I worship the devil. And then they say, see, now you've spoken the truth. And so because you've spoken the truth and you worship the devil, we're going to burn you alive. That's it. So basically, anybody could be picked up and tortured until they extracted the confession. And if they died while being tortured, then you would say, all right, it looks like he was genuinely innocent. But he's dead, so there's nothing can be done. So it was a mechanism which the church used extensively to subdue and suppress the population from speaking or doing anything against church interests. And in principle, anybody could be picked up just like that on a whim. Someone could go and make a complaint. Oh, so-and-so, my neighbor is doing black magic. Straight away, they would come and put you through the torture of Inquisition, because it served the political or religious interests of the church. And so this is what he's referring to. That has changed. So the current form is the investigating judge, and in America, it is called first degree or second degree or up to fifth degree of questioning. So use first degree torture, second degree torture. Now it's called first degree questioning, second degree questioning. It's not changed anywhere much in the world. Even today, it's the same thing. Pretty much you're thrown into jail and confessions extracted under threat or under some kind of torture. You're denied food, water, or other means. The methods are more sophisticated. They don't leave marks. One of the methods they do, for example, is violently hit you with objects which don't leave a wound. So you can be beaten really badly until all your muscles and bones are paining, but there's no mark on the skin, so you cannot prove it. Or they will hit on the foot, where the pain is immense, but there is no sign shown. After that, you cannot even walk. But you will have extracted a confession. So this is the modern method. The torture is sometimes of the mind, not of the body. It is less intense, more lingering, but it leads to the same result in the end. When the tortured wretch, after protecting with lies for as long as may be his guilt or his innocence, escapes from his furious and pitiless persecutor by a true or false confession, preferring jail or the gallows to this prolongation of tense misery, the French call it delicately entering into the way of the avowals. It's the way of confession. Oh, finally you have confessed. Now your soul is free. Now, although you have died, although we will kill you or burn you, you will go to heaven. That was the logic of that time. So, The same mentality continues. The Holy Office in Seville, this was the center of Inquisition at that time, could not have invented a more Christian and gentlemanly euphemism. The American system is in the fifth degree, I think, to keep the miserable accused fasting and sleepless and ply him with a ceaseless assault of torturing questions and suggestions until the brain reels, the body sinks, and the heart is sick and hopeless, and the man is ready to say anything his torturers believe or want to be the truth. So this actually continues even now. It was there extensively during the Second World War. This is nearly 50 years after Sri Aurobindo has written all this, 40 years after. It still continues in pretty much most spaces, so-called civilized spaces. And the idea is that when you're pushed to fasting or you're not prevented from sleeping, combination of lack of food and sleep is when you start entering into a state of delirium. For that, they will play very loud music, or somebody will keep coming and banging on the door of the cell so that you're not prevented from sleeping. The moment you fall asleep, someone bangs, shocks you awake. Again, you drift into sleep, again he bangs, shocks you awake. And in this way, the brain reels and the questions are asked again and again. What did you do? Did you do this? Accept it. State it. And it hammered on you. If you've seen a movie called The Men Who Stare at Goats, there's a scene where this person is briefly shown under this kind of thing. I'll describe what is shown. And these are real. It's not someone's imagination for a movie. The person is put in a small room, so small that he is to crouch. It's a box, basically. His eyelids are held up by force. His hands are bound so he cannot force his eyelids shut. Now, his eyelids are forced open. In front, there is bright light, flashing, and there is very loud music blaring in his ears. Now, if it's done very carefully and cleverly, you are in a box. People outside hear nothing. But you are in the most intense, the most painful sensory overload. And after a few minutes of that, generally you're broken. And if you are held there for a few hours, a few days, you can imagine what the condition would be. So the brain reels, the body sinks, the heart is sick and hopeless, and you'll say anything you want. Anything they want to hear, you'll say. And generally you are no more yourself at that point. It is a true inquisition. The medieval name fits these modern refinements. Why is Sri Aurobindo saying all this? You understand what he's saying still applies, but why is he saying all this? The British people have often been accused as a brutal or a stupid nation. But they have a rugged humanity when their interests are not touched and enjoy glimpses of a rough common sense. They have besides an honorable love of publicity and do not like, for themselves at least, secret police methods. You will see this was the difference between the Allied side and the Nazi Axis side. This was the basic difference. Otherwise, not too much difference. They have rejected the investigating judge and torture in the fifth degree, but their courts resemble the European. So, having described the European condition, Sri Aurobindo is looking at the British as separate from Europe, but with similarities. Under a civilized disguise, these courts are really the medieval ordeal by battle. Now, this is what's actually happening in the courtroom. Only in place of the swords and lances of military combatants, we have the tongues and technicalities of lawyers and the mutually tilting imaginations of witnesses. So even the imaginations are tilting. The victory is to the skillfulest liar and the most plausible workman in falsehoods and insincerities. Now, when we will read this, think about today's courtroom and you will find it has not changed at all. The victory is to the skillfulest liar and the most plausible workman in falsehoods and insincerities. It is largely an elaborate pitch and toss, an exhilarating gamble, a very Monte Carlo, that's where you have the gambling dens, a very Monte Carlo of surprising chances. But there is skill in it too. It satisfies the intellect as well as the sensations. One should rather call it a game of human bridge which admirably combines luck and skill, or consider it an intellectual gladiatorial show. So here you get a glimpse that Sri Aurobindo is familiar with this card game called bridge. And of course, what happens in a gladiatorial show where it's just a game. Nobody is really looking for the truth. It's all about what devices you can use to counter and play of words as in a battle, with a little bit of luck and a little bit of skill. In big cases, the stake is worthy of the play and the excitement, a man's property or his life. So in a big case, you could lose your life, you could win it, you could lose your property or win it. Now remember, Sri Aurobindo is writing this from his own experience. He has been in that gamble of life or death. That's how he describes his time in Tales of Prison Life, where he was sitting there in the same situation. His life was at stake. He could have been hung or released. Who decides that? And the lawyers talking unendingly on technicalities. Nobody is looking for the truth. It's all about technicalities. If the law says this word, did you match this word? Have you fitted this? Is your vocabulary matching this? If not, what is the variant? Would the variant come under this terms and its interpretation? Can we broaden this to include it or not? That's the kind of argument that goes. Was it true? Doesn't matter. Does it fit the technical terms? That's all that matters. All cases are won or lost on basically on technicalities generally. And occasionally the judge. And this is an example, we will see examples of the Supreme Court judges, even the Chief Justice, taking strongly emotional positions which are contrary to common sense where it serves them, or sticking to technicalities where it serves them. And that's the way the system is. I shouldn't blame the system. That's the way the people running the system are. But the system allows it. In big cases, the stake is worthy of the play and the excitement, a man's property or his life. But woe to the beaten. In a criminal case, the tortures of the jail or the terrifying drop from the gallows are in prospect. So if you lose the case, you will get tortured in jail, or your body will drop, break your neck from the gallows. And it is rather the hardihood of guilt than the trembling consciousness of innocence that shall best help him. You can be innocent and sensitive, that's not going to help you. It's more useful, he says, if you are guilty but hardy. That hardiness is what will take you through. And the system makes you like this. Even if you were innocent and you are jailed, you are forced to become hardened if you have to survive the machinery of the jail. Woe to him if he is innocent. As he stands there, for to add to the pleasurableness of his condition, the physical ache of hours of standing is considerately added to the cruel strain on his emotions. He looks eagerly not for the truth or falsehood of the evidence for or against him, but to the skill with which this or that counsel handles the web of skillfully mixed truth and lies, and the impression he is making on the judge or the jury. Now, in those days at least, you had to stand. Even today, I think, if it's a criminal case, you have to stand. While they are talking about you, both lawyers are arguing, you have to stand right there. And you have to say nothing, you have to do nothing unless you're asked to speak. When you do speak, you speak only that much that you're asked to speak. If you try to say anything more, you're stopped. And if you try to speak too much, you'll be thrown out. So you stand there, and for hours together. So at that time, he says the physical ache of those hours, and Sri Aurobindo has been through all that for days and days. Morning to evening, they'd have to stand in the court while the case was being fought. And you're looking not for the truth or falsehood of the evidence, but the skill of the play, mixed truth and lies, and the impression on the judge or the jury. Did the judge smile? Was he impressed? Was he not? Everything depends on that, not on what is true. A true witness breaking down under a confusing cross-examination, or a false witness mended by a judicious re-examination, may be of much better service to him than the truth. Interesting. You can be true in your position, but under confusing cross-examination, you break down. That's useful. or somebody who's completely fake has been prepped properly and speaks lies and ends up with a certain impression. That's more useful than truth. Truth, which our scriptures tell us shall prevail and not falsehood. Eventually, perhaps, and in the things of the truth, but not in the things of the falsehood, not in the court of justice, not in the witness box. So, interesting, Sri Aurobindo's observation that eventually truth might prevail, as scripture tells us, but not in the things of the truth, or not in the things of falsehood, not in court of justice or witness box. Now, here I want to take a slight digression, because this thing about this observation about scripture telling us that truth shall prevail is in fact the motto of the Supreme Court in India. The motto itself was selected because of the Indian tradition and its Indian values. And the motto in the Supreme Court is Yato Dharmas Tato Jaya. Wherever is Dharma, that is the truth in action, the divine truth unfolding, the natural law is how the Buddhists translate it. Wherever there is Dharma, there is victory. So implicit, the idea is that justice will be the fulfillment of a higher Dharma, truth, and the judges are there and the courts are there for fulfilling this. Interestingly, about, I think it was a year ago, that a Supreme Court judge came out with a statement. It was in February 2024, a little more than a year. Justice K. Joseph objected to the motto. And he declared that this was not in tune with the constitution. It is constitution which is the truth, and the Sanskrit text should be removed. So he obviously had a strong reaction against anything to do with Indian culture. And it turns out why? Because in the year 2018, in a seminar, this former Justice Joseph equated the Catholic Church to the preamble of India. And he says, one person who... he says, we represents the Catholic Church. I'm quoting from him. The Catholic Church is one that has always assimilated in itself all the traditions and cultures brought in by the believers from all over the world. This is similar to the preamble of our constitution, which starts with the word we. And then he adds, the one person who holds this church is in the single entity is the Pope. So, his religious affiliation, belief and loyalty is now represented in his priorities as judge of Supreme Court, in which he demands that the Sanskrit text, which is the motto, which represents the highest truth as having victory, should be removed. You have to really understand how warped the thinking of such a person would be. And what would be then his perception on major national issues. And it is only in this context you'll understand. I'll give examples of distortions and perversions in the Supreme Court's behavior. But it is in this context that you'll appreciate that today we have judges, and I'm not saying all, but we have enough judges who are so distorted in their value system, but in positions of power that they can assert that those distortions of their beliefs on the entire country. And they are useful to the cabal, they are useful to the deep state interests and others, because they are well aligned in affinity. So of this, Sri Aurobindo reminds us that, we have been told, Christian, that scripture tells us that justice should win, and that's the motto of the judge, of the Supreme Court today. But he says that's not going to happen in court of justice or in the witness box. There, the last thing the innocent man against whom circumstances have turned dare tell is the truth. Now, this is very surprising, and when he puts it so starkly, it hits you. That if you go to court, and if you genuinely open your heart and tell the truth of exactly how things happened, you will lose. Because the slightest element that you might reveal will be used against you. Even if you say, I looked at the person and I was upset, that will be used to impose motive on you and completely warp the case. So, they're the last thing the innocent man against whom circumstances have turned dare tell is the truth. It would either damn him completely by fatally helping the prosecution, or It is so simple and innocent as to convince the infallible human reason of its pitiful falsity. So if you actually tell the truth, either they will use it against you or they will not believe you, because it's too simple, too obvious. The truth, Sri Aurobindo exclaims, has not the law expressly built up a hedge of technicalities to keep out the truth? This is the system we have inherited, which comes from the European system originally. So, from this point on, Sri Aurobindo speaks of many more things. I don't go too much into the detail, except I will skip to a large part, to a later part now. If the thing proved is generally wrong, it is always ingenious. So how they will do it? They'll quote from this and that and convince you, oh yes, fitting this data, this is how it is proved. And after all, in all these 5 sciences, or are they not rather arts, it is not the thing that is true, but the thing that is desired which must be established. So every side comes with what they want to establish, what is their intent, what is the objective, not what is true. This is perhaps why the Europeans think the system civilized. But as a semi-civilized Oriental, Sri Aurobindo refers to himself, one would prefer less room for subtlety and more for truth. It's interesting, in the system itself, in India at least, the place of truth, of dharma, is preeminent, which is not the case in Europe, interestingly. There it is the process, the values which come from the logic or the book or the belief of the written word, etc. You see also it reflects in the structures of religions. In Europe, largely, all the religions derive from books. And really the understanding of the religion is like a legal hair splitting over the meanings of words. If this is the case with the Bible, which has been translated and there's an official version of translation because the original language is not English, you have unofficial translations which the church will decry because the meaning can be split differently. And what is that? It's supposed to be the word of God? No, it's not. It's even written before Christ. So where is God in the picture? It doesn't matter. All those are, you're not allowed to think like that. Equally, you find in the Judaism, very interestingly, you have so many books, and sometimes they have books which contradict each other in the law. And so it's one of the features which makes for the fact that so many people of Jewish origin are very good lawyers, is that in the training, you're taught to now argue out. This book says that book says that. What are the exceptions? What are the conditions in which it applies? You're arguing unendingly as a scholar. And that's considered to be part of the religious training. It's not about what is true. It's not about what's obviously in alignment with the divine will. It's about the written word and the understanding or the interpretation or its application. And that changes, of course, with the sense of language changing in time. But this is typically, you see, dominant in the European space. So I prefer less room. One would prefer less room, he says, for subtlety and more for truth. On the whole, if anyone were to complain that modern civilization eliminates danger and excitement out of human life, we could well answer the morbid grumbler, come into our courts and see. Still, praise must be given where praise is due, and let the English system once more be lauded for not normally exposing the accused to the torture of savage pursuit by a prosecuting judge, or the singular revival in modern dress of the ancient question by the American police. Where political or other passions are not roused, and bribery does not enter, the poor muddled magistrate does his honest best. I'm going to pause here. There's more in the sentence, but see, already he's telling you what are the key problems of the judge. Political passions will influence the judge. In the case we saw of this justice, his religious passion influenced his. Same with political ideologies. So when a judge is strongly aligned to a political belief system or a party, all the cases, all the orders go in that direction. Or bribery. That's the other way which swings a judge. The poor muddled magistrate does his honest best. He's muddled. He doesn't care really at the end of the day. If you see the way it works in the courts, they don't care. They just tell the lawyers to give their things. Okay, what is it? What's the technicality? What's at stake? What is the technical point on which the whole issue rests? They don't even want to think. Let the lawyers tell you. And then on that, they will make some observations. And where there is a system of trial by jury, the blunders, whims and passions of 12 men may decide your fate less insanely than the caprices of a qazi, though even that is hardly certain. So now we come to something very interesting. He's saying you can have a single judge. He refers to the qazi. That's the judge in Bengal at that time. That's the title given. Instead of one judge, you could have a jury. Then you'd have 12 people who would decide your fate less insanely. One judge will be more insane, 12 people will be less insane. Interesting observation, because I always asked myself, how is it that in India this kind of judicial excess is possible? Because we have seen the worst. And I've had, a few years ago, I was involved in certain cases and I had to go to the court, and I've seen firsthand how it works. And I asked myself, where does this come from and what could be done to reduce this, the extent of the corruption? And I asked myself, why is it we don't have the jury? Because the jury is one system where the judge can be overridden by people who are you and me, normal people. And well, you can say one or two might get corrupt, one or two might be swung by political or religious interests, ideologies, but 12, because they've been selected by both sides with as much objectivism as possible, why not bring that back? And then it turns out the Indian judicial system threw out the jury system in 1973 because it was not conducive to their interests. They gave many reasons. One of the reasons was it's too expensive. But really, is that true? Because what happens when you have a jury system, 12 people are there, they're drawn from normal life. You have to hold hearings day to day and finish it within a short time. But you have to have 12 people, so you have to cover the cost of 12 people. And the judge cannot override them. The judge cannot say, you are all wrong, I will decide to go this way. You can't bribe easily. So by throwing out the jury system, the judge could unendingly delay for years together because now there's nobody accountable. The judge is sitting there every day anyway. It makes no difference if the case appears or not. And he alone decides and there's nobody to question him. If you do dare to question him, then you can be put in jail for the technicality of questioning the judicial system. Interesting. So look at it in this way. Where in the country can you be put in jail for questioning? Only in the judicial system. By insulting technically. You're insulting, you're raising doubt against their integrity. You can go to jail. That's it. Interesting. So wouldn't that be a very convenient place to hold certain power positions and interests? So, but he points, Sri Aurobindo points that this system of jury actually would be less harmful than a single judge. And I would still suggest that if the current government cannot clean up the justice system, then force the jury system to be brought back. And it will force things to come back on track because the common man's views will be reflected in the judgment. In fact, one of the reasons or the excuses given for throwing out the jury system was one case, Nanavati case in Bombay, which took place, I think, 1971. And that was used as an excuse. And to me, that was fascinating as an excuse. It's a bit of a digression, but maybe I'll just touch upon it. What happened was there's this very senior person in the Navy, high-level captain or higher, who, while he was away in the Navy, his wife had an affair with somebody. He comes back, discovers this. His wife tells him, yes, she did have it. So he then takes his service revolver, goes to that man's house and says, are you willing to marry my wife and look after the children? So the man gave some very crude response, saying that I can't be taking responsibility for any woman that I sleep with. So this man got angry and there was a altercation between them, in which the service revolver accidentally fired 3 times. Obviously, 3 cannot be accidental, whatever. And then he immediately goes to the naval base and gives himself up to the legal system and says, I just caused this by accident. Now, this went into a jury system. After all the deliberations, the jury declared him not guilty. And the judges said, this is not acceptable, this is a failure of justice. So the judges overrode the jury eventually and gave him life imprisonment. But this case was used as an excuse to throw out the jury system, saying that you cannot rely on the jury. But I would counter it the other way. I would say the jury represented the common man's value system. And even if that was accidental or not, the point was, in the balance, here's a man who's dedicated his life to serving the country and honor. And when he meets a complete extreme of dishonor and a perversion, and he loses his cool at that moment, whatever the framework in which you interpret, the jury preferred to let him go free. And from a certain perspective, one can actually understand from certain civilizational values why that could be so. It does not fit the uniform structure of British law. Nevertheless, one could have handled it in different ways. It should not have been made the reason for throwing out the jury system itself. But as I pointed out, it was an excuse. So, Sri Aurobindo completes this article. At any rate, if the dice are apt to be loaded, it is, with the exceptions noted, not on one but on both sides of the gamble. So, there are other articles, I'm not going to go into them. There's one more which is called More About British Justice, where he speaks of the systems and its limitations. And all of these, what is fascinating to me is they still have relevance in the condition today. And in a way, it's a bit of a disappointment that 100 years down, nothing has really changed. Things have gotten worse, if anything. In one of these articles, he says one of the best ways for the bureaucracy to extend its hold is to put a weak judge and to put a weak High Court judge and create a large number of such judges. And this is exactly what has happened. And that's how the machinery has got a stranglehold on people. The result is you need more and more judges, the costs go up, but the cases are not being resolved. It's getting worse and worse and worse every year. There is absolutely no improvement in the actual clearance of cases. There's absolutely no improvement in the quality of justice. Instead, judges have become focal points of power to an extent and of corruption, to such an extent that people find this shocking. And nobody has faith in the judicial system at all. Now, this has reached a point where I'm going to give you examples of what has really happened. These are just examples, remember. I have actually documented over the last 5 years, I've been saving news items to make a pretty good collection. I just don't think it's worth for me to go back across all that and put it all together. I'll have at least 25 such cases of extreme perversion in the judicial behavior or actions, which are contrary to their role or values. Here's one example. If you recall, about a few years ago, 2021, I think, there were the farmer protests. This was at that time orchestrated by certain foreign powers to try to overthrow the Modi government. And it's a similar strategy they've used in other places. So all these farmers had ganged up. They were coming in tractors all the way to Delhi, blocking the highways. For what? Because the government wanted to pass 3 farm laws to implement certain innovations in farming. Implications, at least, were that the farmers would have greater freedom and less control by certain embedded, let's say, political interests. It would have freed up the farming space for a lot of innovative work. And they would be less beholden to the political powers which give them doles, basically, with minimum prices, etc. So this was used as an excuse. Farmer protests are going on, and suddenly, out of the blue, the Supreme Court takes cognizance of this, in other words, interferes in the whole matter, rather than letting the government sort it out with the farmers, which is entirely the right thing to do. The Supreme Court stays the laws. On what grounds? Nothing. It's not against the law, it's not against the constitution, it's not against anything. Here is elected representatives of the people who are making a law in the interests of the people. They may justify it, they may question it, you can argue all you want, and yes, you can have protests all you want, have negotiations. And the government kept asking, let's negotiate, let's talk. The farmers refused. Now what was interesting at that time, you watch, and this is how I'm pointing this out because you will understand when it's a cabal game. In all the newspaper items, in all the newspaper reports, they kept saying, farmers refused, farmers stated this, farmers made this. Which farmers? No names are given. When eventually, and I'm digging like through 10 or 20 news reports, I found one report which mentioned the farmer's name. He was the son of a politician from Haryana. Interesting. So there was a whole political organization behind, and the newspapers were lying to you by saying farmers are saying this. Well, I asked my local farmer, they said, no, we are not concerned. But who are those farmers? So at that point, when farmers are saying this and the government is saying, let's talk, we will hold back, we will make changes, we will change all the laws to suit your needs. This was the stated position of the central government. And the farmers refused. They demanded you take back the law, then only we will discuss. Now that's a game. That's a game where you're not interested in really solving a problem. You're interested in a political embarrassment. And it was backed by political parties. So at that point, rather than allowing this to settle, the Supreme Court steps in and stops the law. On what grounds? None. You're stopping the will of the people technically because your elected representatives are being stopped. And then they form a committee appointed by who? By them. Full of their ideological interests, which were largely leftists, to discuss with farmers and other stakeholders and give a report to the Supreme Court. Is that the role of the Supreme Court to govern the nation? The Supreme Court's role is totally different. So they appoint their buddies, left buddies, who go have some discussions with farmers. And as I said, they were all political discussions. They come back with a report. And the Supreme Court to this day has kept the report confidential. But they stayed the law. Eventually the government withdrew the law because it was pointless. You were battling the Supreme Court, which was accountable to nobody. This is the level of corruption of national interest by people who are accountable to no one. Nobody elected the Supreme Court judges. On their own, they were overriding technically the will of the people because it's the elected politicians. You're overriding them, suppressing in the name of doing some kind of investigation with a committee, and the results of the committee's report are confidential. How do you get away with this? Because the media never raised a peep. Because the media was controlled by the same political groups. And that's how you've all been conned. After all these years, nobody still knows what happened with that report. And nobody is asking what happened to those 3 laws. Why not implement them? And from the political stance, probably, and this is my speculation, the government decided that to implement those laws, they might lose an election, so they will not go ahead with it. Who lost at the end of the day? The country. The correct thing, if at all the Supreme Court wanted to interfere, would have said, force the farmers, sit down and talk it over. And if you want our involvement, we will oversee to ensure that nothing is done which is illegal. That's all they can say or do, isn't it? If they had a say and if they put out this committee, the committee should have gone and seen, well, what are the benefits and what are the difficulties which might come from these laws and make it public. No transparency, a complete black hole, black box. The only thing they did was to cancel those laws. That's all. On what grounds? None. Entirely illegal. How do they get away with it? Because they're the Supreme Court and nobody is raising a peep. This is a complete failure of the democratic structure, failure of the Constitution itself. Because the Constitution never envisaged that the judges would step in and override the executive or the or the politically elected people. One example. Another example, August 2024, last year, when there was the rape in Calcutta's medical college, Car Medical College. At that time, already in Calcutta, the High Court had taken up the whole matter. They had ordered the CBI, again the Federal Investigative Agency in India, to investigate the whole matter. They had taken over so that the state government cannot interfere. Investigations are going on, preliminary reports are being filed, and suddenly the Supreme Court woke up and decided to take suo motu cognizance of the matter. Basically, that means we have decided to interfere in the matter. Why? When the High Court is doing it, when the CBI is doing it, what is the role that Supreme Court can add to it? And this is very interesting to watch very carefully. So I monitored carefully what are the decisions, what are the orders they give. And obviously their interest was to protect the West Bengal government because there's a leftist ideological alignment. So what did they do? They ordered all the documents and the investigative reports to come to them instead of the High Court and the CBI. They began to make noises to the CBI. We need results. You need to do this. You need to do that. And one of the orders, interestingly, which was in the media, it was covered up quite easily. One of the orders was limit the investigation of the video feed to the 4 a.m. to 7 a.m. slot. Interesting. Now, the murder rape itself took place several hours before. The correct thing would have been to have the entire video feed from the evening through the night through the morning. And they demanded only this. Other feed then went missing. So it's one of the interventions which came specifically from the Supreme Court orders. There were others. There were others which all of them were basically one side on the grounds that we are seeing into the matter, High Court cannot do anything while we investigate. What did they do? They had hearing after hearing. So you watch every week. What's happening? Well, postpone to next week. Okay, what's happened? Now we postpone to next week. Meanwhile, in West Bengal, there was this huge, massive public upsurge against the government. The government would have been toppled, probably. It was that bad. Every night, every day, you had all these large gatherings demanding resignation of the government. And the Supreme Court ensured that could not happen because they were delaying from week to week. Until eventually the whole thing fizzled out. So they prevented the fall of the government, they prevented the investigation from being comprehensive, and finally the outcome was the orders from the investigation where it was a single person who was responsible, it was not a gang rape. When in fact all the initial evidence was that it was a gang rape. So they were finally able to narrow down the accusation to one single person who was secondary in the whole thing, and the political elements which were more powerful were allowed to go scot-free. So, and the Supreme Court deflected the whole attention from what was happening in West Bengal to the country. This was another thing they did. There were three interventions they did. What they did was saying, instead of, here's a problem in West Bengal where women are not safe because of the nature of the government which has become so corrupt. It's a Gunda government basically. Every college, every institution has the party representative locally who manages everything. And if you do anything which is contrary to his interest, the party kicks you out. That's the condition. It's actually mafia rule. Instead of saying West Bengal has a mafia problem, it turned the whole problem to the country. Women in India are not safe in medical colleges, so they appointed a national task force which they selected to examine safety and security of all medical colleges and give recommendations for all colleges. But the problem was not in India, it was only in West Bengal. So by deflecting attention away, it was no more a West Bengal issue, it was an Indian problem. So this is a strategy which is used by people in power. And normally politicians do this. You saw this happening from the Supreme Court, except there was nobody to question them. And it was so much on their own, they decided to interfere. This is another example of how the Supreme Court is used by cabal interests. And it was in this case to protect the West Bengal government, and in other cases it has been used to embarrass or prevent the central government from proceeding with its interests. I give one more example. This was in Ramdev. You've all heard of Baba Ramdev, who has been doing exceptional work initially in spreading yogasanas and then later in developing Ayurvedic products at a very low price. So he is today one of biggest businessmen in India, into crores of profits. But all his, because he has no personal interest in that sense, all the profits are reinvested to expanding his, let's say, business or the service which he provides through the business. In fact, the prices are so low; they're sometimes half or even 1/4 of the same products from other sources. You may question the quality; that's your choice. But if you want to have low price, you get it from him, and reasonable quality. And then he's popularized yogasanas. So all those are positive things. Now, one of the things he started doing was to promote Ayurveda. He began to do Ayurvedic research with these traditional Ayurvedic medicines on many of the conventional illnesses which allopathy does not cover. Diabetes, asthma, thyroid problems, blood pressure, etc. And these were published papers. They were doing hardcore research, publishing papers showing evidence of improvement. So as a result, in their advertisements, they began to say, look, these medicines actually help in healing such and such ailments. Now, there's a law going back, I think, 1951, where you cannot claim cure for diabetes or thyroid or blood pressure problems. There's some lists of illnesses in 1951 are incurable officially. So if you claim cure, then you are a charlatan. Now, 1951 is not 2023 or 24 when this happened. And he's backing it with his documentation. So at that point, the Indian Medical Association, which is not a government body, which is a private body, run by somebody who in the head of the president of the Indian Medical Association during the COVID lockdown actually stated that it's a very good opportunity to proselytize and convert India to Christianity. That's the head of IMA. He turns against Ramdev and puts a case in the Supreme Court saying that this is false claims. And the Supreme Court ordered the advertisements to be withdrawn and to summon Ramdev. So Ramdev's lawyers gave the responses saying, no, these are not false claims. Here's our research. Supreme Court got upset. They summoned Ramdev and ordered them to withdraw their advertisements, which they did. Then they ordered them to put an apology, which they did. Then the Supreme Court said, but your apology is not good enough. It is not large enough on the newspaper. Put another apology, which is on a large space in the newspaper. So they said, look, we're spending money. We're going to lose a lot of money to put out these ads. No problem. You have to do it. So they do that. Then the Supreme Court orders complete withdrawal and ban of 14 products. Some of these were extremely useful. I personally had found many of them useful for precisely what they claimed. And they were banned. They were stopped from production. Then they summoned the government authority which had given permission for making those products, which are traditional Ayurvedic products, and told them, under what authority do you give them permission to do something which is not, which is a false claim? You know, this is the threat what Sri Aurobindo was describing. This is your inquisition. And the government authority actually backs off saying, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. What was the mistake here? It's a traditional Ayurvedic product. You have given permission. Your job is only to ensure that it is not mixed with poisonous things or falsely claiming the content of the medicine. The medicine itself is a conventional thing. What else do you have to do? No, I made a mistake to allow them permission to manufacture. That's under threat from Supreme Court. So all these statements are being produced in the public. The media, leftist media, was going gaga over this. At which point the Supreme Court got upset that in all this happening, Ramdev and his colleague had not come to the court personally and had sent only their lawyers. So they demanded one more session where they would come and apologize in the court. And you can see how ridiculous it is. The whole system of law is the lawyer represents you and the lawyers are faceless technically, so that you can be objective. Now you're summoning the person to see their face in order to humiliate them for no reason than just to show your power of humiliation. It's interesting that one of the judges there was one justice of a particular religion which is very strongly against anything to do with India's traditions and of course Ayurveda. So you see how the perversion of personal interests can cloud the behavior of the courts. At the end of the day, those 14 products have been withdrawn, banned technically. For no reason than they are Ayurvedic, that's all. Subsequent to that, the Kerala High Court made a similar harassment, summoned Ramdev, had more cases, and got upset that they didn't come personally and sent lawyers instead, etc. Just to show you an example of corruption of justice. Another example is the Nupur Sharma case. She was a BJP representative, official spokesman. And at that point, there was a case where in a particular former temple which had been converted into a mosque, where a shivling was there, people were urinating on it or washing things. A lot of things were happening. It had just come into public knowledge, and so there was a debate in some television channel. This person was given some very accusatory, crude comments about Hindu beliefs. She countered it by saying, look, if you are worried about beliefs, here is something, and she quotes from the Hadith, official, technical, accepted document of Islam. She quotes from there and says, how do you explain this? And that created a storm. Naturally, around this was an organization, again, political interests and other religious interests. They created demonstrations threatening her, and they threatened to kill her, basically. The Supreme Court at this point, and they filed cases all over the country. So she approached the Supreme Court to say that, look, I can't be going everywhere because they're threatening to kill me if I move around. Can we all put it together in one case in the Supreme Court? Supreme Court, meanwhile, declared that she was responsible for the riots by quoting from the Hadith, which are official texts, and blamed her, abused her, accused her, and in the most ugly forms. For what? For stating what is a formal text, quoting from there, in response to someone who was actually abusive on the television channel of Hindu beliefs. And the court turned it around, flipped it completely against her. To the end that when she demanded protection, she was refused protection by the court. She said, well, this government can take care of it, we are not concerned. Similar thing happened with Ranveer Allahabadia. He is a very famous figure for interviews online. And in one program they were doing, which he was trying to be humorous, he said something really crude. It's crude, agreed. Supreme Court takes up the matter. He has accusations against him from all over the place and threats. And Supreme Court tells him again, you have a dirty mind. That's the accusation. So please apologize for having a dirty mind. And then they made him grovel for a few weeks. And at the end of it, and said, okay, now you can go. You have apologized and you can go. Is that the role of the Supreme Court? To actually play the role of the lawkeeper? And you have to ask yourself, they're taking the position of the elected representatives, they're taking the position of the lawkeeper, they're disseminating justice without a proper hearing because it hurts them that you have a dirty mind, and refusing protection, saying that the state government can take care of it when it suits them. On the other hand, when it was, as I said, political interests, they will swing anyway. And one of the most extreme forms in which they swung was when this terrorist called Yaqub Menon, who was convicted in the 1993 Mumbai bombings. After nearly 20 years, the case comes to an end and he is about to be hanged. So he is about to be hanged at 7 a.m. and the court is approached by his lawyers. And the entire Supreme Court, at that point, I don't remember, several justices coming together at 3 a.m. to have a hearing just on a technicality, whether this technicality should be considered to let him go free. So I would simply ask this question. That means you did not do your job before. For all the hearings that took place over 20 years, you did not do your job, that the technicality can be brought up now at 3 a.m. and you're willing as a court to actually sit at 3 a.m. to protect and save a known terrorist, and nobody is doubting that he actually shot. There's full footage of him shooting and killing people. And that shows you the warped priorities of the highest court in the country. And if this is not enough, I'm not saying everybody is corrupt. It's just the warping of the values which corrupts justice itself. And this is not enough. We have outright corrupt judges. so corrupt, so extremely corrupt that they are known to be corrupt. There's an article which I think I've posted that as one of the links. If you read in the article, it actually says this, that today, and it's the Supreme Court judge who's saying this publicly, that people look for who the judge will be to assess whether they will win the case or not. So implying not only the judges are predictable, but how much they can be influenced and on what grounds. But also based on that, they will withdraw a case if they think the judge is the type that they will not win. And that's example given there in that article. So what is fascinating here was one case of a Justice Yashwant Verma. He was away from the house. There was a fire, electrical fire or whatever. And in a little room next to the house, because of the fire, they called the fire engine. And as they broke through the door, they find cash in large gunny bags, piles and piles of cash in the crores that this judge has accumulated, obviously from, bribes. And this is photographed, this is videoed first by the fire department and then the police. So first 24 hours, always you'll see when there's a first 24 hours, the evidence, the data comes freely, openly. And then generally within 12 hours, the corrective movement starts to block and spin the story. And you could see immediately how the stories changed. Now suddenly the fire engine head said, no, but we didn't find cash. The police said we didn't find anything. No, it's not true. They went into denial. But the videos had been circulating already. It went so bad that at some point there was pressure for action. What happens next? The Supreme Court takes suo motu cognizance, meaning and we need to interfere to protect our own. And they decide that they will not allow the police to investigate. They will not allow the government to act in the normal process of law, but they will do their own investigation. So they appoint their own investigator. Now, this is never the job of a judge. That's the job of the police. The police are trained for investigating, judges are not. So, but the judges are going to do their investigation. They go to the place, they take a look around, they ask questions as it suits them and come out with a report. The report is then confidential. And then the Chief Justice says, in order to maintain transparency, a part of the report is made public, saying, yes, they did find cash. And then the rest of the report is still confidential. And as a confidential report, they forward it to the President of India. Since when is a criminal behavior forwarded to President of India for action? So it goes to the President of India and then the Chief Justice says, I cannot make the report public because it is confidential to President of India. That's his excuse. And I cannot take action because now it's in the hands of the President. President has to take action. But President is not either a judge who can pass orders as a lawyer, as a judge, or he is not a police who can make arrests. What's the President going to do? So the President's name is used as a cover by the justice system to protect its own corrupt people. Meanwhile, he is transferred to Allahabad High Court. Allahabad High Court refused, the lawyers went on strike. So the judge says, no, this was a routine transfer, we are not doing anything new. But in fact, the attempt was to let him continue his duties in a different city. This is the system of protection. Now what happens when you approach the Supreme Court and say, someone filed a case saying, please allow us to file an FIR, first information report, to the police to take action about this corruption. Supreme Court refused, saying we cannot allow you to file an FIR. We cannot allow the police to investigate it because we have done the investigation and he cannot be arrested because we have passed it to President. Amazing, isn't it? So here's a system which has broken. And the way it works, this is the shocking part of it, is that the judges have formed a collegium, this goes back now 30 years, where they will select their own judges. So if they are corrupt, they ensure the corrupt stay with them. And so there's no way to ensure that the corrupt cabal of interests or deep state is broken. And every attempt that the government tried to change the system, the judges went into a huddle saying you are interfering with our freedom and our independence, and the media backed them. So that's the leftist interest group. So this collegium basically appoints its own, but fortunately by a prior system in the law, the government has to approve it. So whenever they appointed corrupt people, the government refused to approve. So the non-approvals were larger than the approvals for several years now. And then, of course, the judges start complaining that the government is not approving, so we don't have enough judges. Government said, you pick people who are known to be not corrupt, or at least not known to be corrupt, and we will approve. So that's a kind of a stalemate. But the interesting thing is, the collegium can appoint anybody on their own with no reference to anyone else, but nobody can remove them except Parliament. So here's a systematic failure. Normally, if someone can appoint, they should be able to remove, or someone higher should be able to remove, but within the system. So collegium will not remove, cannot remove. And as in this case with Justice Yashwant Verma, we have done our part. We did our own investigation, which is not their job. We forwarded to President, which is not their job, and it's not President's job. And hence, no investigation is possible. And the result is there's a stalemate. So the government has finally, the Vice President had to make a statement that this is unacceptable. This is not normal. And who are the people that they are protecting? Vice President had to say this in public. So I put a link regarding that. Vice President publicly stated that who is behind Yashwant Verma justice, that the whole machinery of the Supreme Court has to protect. And this is the question to be asked. He said this openly. I'm not saying something new, so you cannot criticize me for not respecting the judges. It's Vice President of India has said it. Why does he have to say it? And still he's helpless. So the latest statement is that they are going to have to start an impeachment process in Parliament end of the year. How many months that you have to wait because Parliament has to convene? And when they start the impeachment process, what happened? Meanwhile, they have also created a second controversy. There was a judge from one of the courts, High Court judge, who in a public program questioned why India does not have a uniform civil code, and that it was high time to have a uniform civil code, and made certain statements in that direction. So the entire press now ganged up against him for stating this, which is the most obvious thing. It should have happened 70 years ago. And on him, the certain political parties and leftist interests started an impeachment process in Parliament. So now you have an impeachment process for saying that India should have uniform civil code to be put on the same platform as an impeachment process for someone who is known to be corrupt because they found stashes of cash. And they're going to rig the two things together and say this is equivalent. That's the nature of the game of the trying to embarrass people politically, or the media covering up the reality of what's happening. I'm sharing all this with you in great detail so you understand the game that is actually played, the interest groups and the way they function to protect their own, and the underlying corruption of values and interests which destroys national interest. And the judiciary is just one of the focal points of this kind of harm for the nation. How will it change? I don't know. But something has to break. And that's why when we read earlier from Sri Aurobindo, you see how topical and relevant it is. He gives two things which makes for empires to break. First, excessive taxes. And second is the failure of justice and protection for the common people. And the extent of judicial corruption or failure of justice when justice is denied, or we have cases which are going on for the last 30, 40, 50 years with no end in sight, that shows you that we have reached a point where people don't trust the courts anymore. You go to court when you want to create trouble for somebody else. You get a stay order and then the other fellow has to fight it out. No progress is possible until this stay is removed. And it can go on for years and years because that's the way the system works. All the judges were former lawyers, and the lawyers make money per hearing. And a hearing is listed, but they have to appear for it. If they don't receive money from you the morning, they don't appear for you. They may appear for you, but the case might be postponed, but they have taken the money and you cannot ask for it back. So basically, their cases get postponed again and again. Each time they make money. The judges have been former lawyers. They know how this works. They want to ensure their own get the money that they have to. And it goes on unendingly. Common man is the loser. You pay money per appearance in which nothing happens. And for years together. And depending on how important it is, the lawyer takes that much more money and has that much less responsibility. And then as it works, you don't know if your case will appear tomorrow until 6 p.m. or 6:30 p.m. That's when the list suddenly appears on the internet. Now, if you were living in a different city and your case is in the Supreme Court, you have to take the early morning flight, get there in time, so that you can brief your lawyer, because your lawyer doesn't care about your case. He doesn't know the details. He's handling 100 cases or 200, depending on how senior he is. And if he's handling 200 cases, he doesn't know a thing about your case. So the morning of the case, that's when you know that you're going to have a hearing, or the night before generally. You're sitting there and they're going through the papers. What is it? Just tell me in 5 minutes. What's the summary? And you have to brief them all over again. The same brief that you've been doing for the last several years. Okay, I get it. Okay, let's move on. Next, what else are we going to have? Go through rapidly. And the fellow is not going to remember. So at the point of the case, 2 or 3 students write documents with them. And that's how the case is viewed. It's a complete failure of the system itself. And then there's the mention. So as the case appears, the lawyer's assistant will go up to the judge and say, he's busy in another hearing in another part of the court, so can you please postpone it to afternoon or postpone it to tomorrow? And it vanishes. The judge says, okay. Now you got a listing after waiting for 1 month. It's been gone. You'll have to wait 1 more month. So the logical thing would have been, if there's a sequence, you finish today, it continues tomorrow. You just wait on. It should go in sequence. No, tomorrow will be a completely new list and yours will not be in the list. So the result is common man suffers so much that you have lost faith in the legal system. This being the case in India, it's not very different in the United States. And I want to just mention this. I'll complete the topic here. Every order that Trump has been passing for setting right whatever he had promised in his election, for setting right the system, cleaning up the system, for removing illegal immigrants, etc. Every order that he has been passing, there was some federal judge who was countering the order. And if you have been following, mostly the mainstream media does not cover all this, or they twist the reason for the cover, for the order being suppressed. If you've been following the Gateway Pundit, generally there you will see the reasons. And most cases, the judge was appointed formerly by Barack Obama. So it's a political thing. So when Trump was deporting some of the illegal immigrants who were gang lords, who were known for brutal murders or rapes, or who were high up in the drugs distribution network, when Trump was deporting them, you had judges who were ordering the government to cancel the deportation. So the moment it was announced that some so-and-so drug lord was being deported to his country, the judge gives an order that do not deport him. Trump said, no, we will. You cannot stop us. So the judge got very upset. They did deport. The judge gave an order, now send a plane to bring him back. Now this is a man who was a known murderer, rapist and drug dealer. And Trump picked the worst cases. And the judge is ordering him to be brought back officially with the government funding and support to be given a comfortable stay in the United States. And he's an illegal immigrant. He's not a US citizen. You have to really wonder at the perversion of it all and how they can get away with it because the media backs them. So eventually, when there was nearly about 20 or 30 such orders by various judges, each time trying to block any orders coming from Trump, the government had to go to the Supreme Court and get an order from the Supreme Court saying that a federal judge cannot override the presidential order. And so that kind of ended this whole game. But the game was going on until then for several months. And I'm giving this as an example to show you how the machinery works, that the judicial system has been so bought out across the world that they are the last resort for the cabal interests to ensure that any corrective measures which weaken cabal agendas will be neutralized by a judicial intervention. And this is across the world. India is no exception. It's just that the judges need to put it under suitable terms. So in the United States, it was because of human rights or some technicalities or environmental interests, etc. Those were generally the cover stories. But behind that, you could see that it was not genuine in most cases. And goal was simply to preempt any action taken by the Trump government or simply to embarrass the Trump government. One of the biggest actions which the Trump government had been doing, which was blocked by the judicial orders, was cleaning up the government itself and particularly the deep state interests through Doge, which Elon Musk personally was handling. So I'm going to end with this part of the discussion today. It's taken some time, but I want to finish the topic. As you know, Elon Musk headed the Doge, Department of Government Efficiency. And you have to really see some of the things they found. They had millions of dollars going all over the world, and then of course in the United States, but millions of dollars going all over the world to promote gender agendas, gender sensitization, gender conversions in Africa, in Pakistan, in various countries, where you would not even accept that the government would want such a thing. And why is the money going there? Mostly these were cover stories for funding other agendas, which were often somehow involving either government overthrow or some of the cabal interests. And they would create these front NGOs, which would receive the money under typically these heads and then do whatever they had to do quietly behind the scenes. So in India, similarly, they had quite a few non-government bodies, NGOs, whose job it was to overthrow the government. So they would receive money from this system and then distribute it for creating general unrest, etc. So all these Elon Musk was chopping out daily, and some of them they were announcing quite openly. Some of these were shocking. They had billions of dollars going simply to torture animals in all kinds of weird experiments which had zero purpose. Among them were experiments to convert animals from one gender to another. Why would you want to do that even? And this was all part of the other agenda, satanic agenda, which intended eventually to be turned to human beings. So if you look at some of those lists, they are laughable. And then there was a hearing in the US Congress where they mentioned some of these things, and the media completely blocked it. So one of the best sources I have personally found where you get it in very blunt, direct terms is the Gateway Pundit, where they just say it to you as it is. And the beauty of this site is the headline tells you everything. So you don't need to read the whole article. You read the headline, you get the full idea, and if it interests you, you go deeper into it. You have to be careful. There are certain sponsored headlines. It says sponsored, but those are, of course, advertisement articles. But then generally, this is one place where you see national interest, US national interest, and you understand things really well from that. So this was going on, and you had judges blocking Doge from doing its job. So every time they, for example, they had the US aid. Now, US aid was an instrument for the US government to overthrow basically other countries' elected representatives. This was the big agenda. They had other interests also. It was basically promoting US government agendas in other countries, including overthrow of governments or keeping governments under check or spying. It was a combination of various things. So when they dismissed most of the US aid workers, then it was a judge again who came in and said, you can't dismiss them. Why? No reason, except that it's a judge order. And so all these had to be countered by legal means. But it shows you the power of a judge to cause injustice or failure of justice or deny justice. Anyway, to come to the point there, a lot of people who were thrown out from the system were people who were either taken in because of some LGBTQ agenda or what they called inclusiveness agendas. They were not really competent. They were just taken in because they were gays or lesbians to be called inclusive. So all these people were simply removed because they were not technically qualified in the first place and they were taken for other reasons. So many such removals were of this kind which the media spun around to a different story. And you had to really understand what was happening and the media was not telling you the truth. Another example, in the technical field also, many people were removed and the reasons were quite different from what the media told you. So many of the people deported were simply deported because they were illegal. But I saw an interview with a scientist because I was following a technical article, and the interview started with the scientist saying, you are an immigrant and under Trump you should be thrown out. What do you have to say to that? And the man says, oh, Trump is such a nasty fellow, etc., etc. Then the interview proceeds to the science. But implicit to this, and you're given the wrong idea, and the person is being made to make statements for having his interview published, critical of Trump, on wrong grounds. Trump never spoke of immigration being bad. He spoke of illegal immigration being bad. So soon after you have Trump making a statement, I love the immigrants, I love the Chinese who are joining and others. So the media played that as a contrast. See, Trump says he's against immigrants, now he's saying he's for immigrants, he's changing his mind every day. No, he was very clear. Illegal immigrants are not welcome. Legal immigrants are welcome. Why? Because you control the quality of people who come. That's all. And the other point with students was, students who come to study in higher education in the United States are not there to do politics. So if they start doing demonstrations which are pro-Palestine, anti-Israel, or whatever, pro-US, or they're burning US flags, that's not acceptable. So such students should be thrown out. Their visas cancelled. They came for student visa, not activist visas. So again, the media spun this around saying, oh, Trump is refusing potential immigrants or students coming for education. No, it was very clear what he was talking about. It was on this that there was this collision with Harvard. So I'm coming now to the last part, which is the conflict with Elon Musk. At some point, once his tenure ended, Elon Musk stepped down from the Doge position. During the time he was there, he was attacked to no end by the media, including his team, which was drawing out data, and they attacked each person in the team. There were people and certain newspapers in the United States which exposed the houses of these team members, inviting physical assault and attacks by those who were against the Doge agenda. So it went really bad, and the whole team was under huge stress. But they did their job, and during that time they turned against Elon Musk, attacking all cars manufactured by his companies. So Tesla cars were being attacked and destroyed all over the United States, just as a hate Musk agenda which the media was promoting in order to put pressure on Elon Musk. So when he completed his tenure, he stepped down, the media celebrated. Trump had a special farewell party with him. Everything was positive. He leaves, and then suddenly this altercation starts, where he starts accusing Trump. Trump starts criticizing him, and there's a big drama going on. So there were a couple of questions which had come about this. Why is it that this is happening, and what does it really mean? I'm not going to read the question, but I'm just going to answer because we're short on time. Remember one thing. Elon Musk is super smart. He's managing multiple companies which are making breakthrough after breakthrough. He has negotiated enormous attacks from the cabal, including people entering his factories to try to sabotage from inside, and he has survived that. And suddenly, if you think he's going to start making really stupid mistakes, doesn't quite fit the data. Just this morning, there was one article which appeared, which was the head of Trump's AI team, XAI, where he's creating this AI called Grok, who's leaving Elon Musk, and then he joined the other company which is making ChatGPT. But he was with Elon Musk for several years already. And as he leaves, he gives a parting appreciation of Musk. And the kind of praise he gives, he says, it's been such a wonderful experience. And directly working with Elon Musk, I've learned so much, and it's been such a wonderful thing. And the kind of praise he gives, you don't get that from somebody who's stupid or a tyrant or who's flaky or moody. And he gives specifics. He didn't need to do that. He gives specifics. And one of the things he says there, which is very interesting, he says the founder of NVIDIA, Huang Jensen, if I remember right. Huang Jensen is right in saying that under Musk, things happen which are exceptional. I have to get the exact word if I could find it, but I don't have that here. But he says, under Musk, things happen which are unprecedented and exceptional. I'm putting my own word. Okay, let me get you the exact text. So the headline is head of infrastructure engineering at Elon Musk's AI company resigns, says Jensen Huang was right. Elon Musk and his team, Elon Musk and his team are singular in what they can achieve. Grateful to have played a small part in shaping the future of AI compute from the inside. And after an unforgettable role, I've decided to move on from XAI. Yesterday was my last day. When I joined, I thought everyone was absolutely nuts for thinking we could deploy 100,000 GPUs, graphic processing units, in 4 months, especially without a fully functioning site. Watching us go and double that, and most importantly, successfully train Grok 3 made me incredibly proud and very happy to be wrong. Now, you see, this is a man who is now quoting also the head of NVIDIA, which is the biggest company making these AI chips, and saying that it was impossible to think. Elon Musk said, I'll make 100,000 GPU AI in 4 months. No infrastructure, no site, nothing, no team in place. This is impossible. Anybody with common sense would say it's impossible. Not only Elon Musk does it, he doubles what he promised in terms of GPUs and successfully launches Grok 3, which is now competing as well as any other AI, superior in many ways. This is not a normal person. What he's able to achieve is so exceptional, so extraordinary as to be nearly superhuman. And such people don't make stupid mistakes. So if he is criticizing Trump, there's a good reason. If there's a conflict between them, there's a very good reason. And the reason is simply this. First of all, he was coming under huge attack because he had aligned himself openly and was doing the work of Doge. He put the team in place. They are now independent. They don't need him anymore. So he can step out. His work is done, but the work continues in the standards he has set. And if at all he needs to guide them, he can do it remotely. Now that he stepped out, he needs to be free from the attacks which were coming so that he can work on his thing. But he has also announced a political party to do what Trump is not doing. Now here's the interesting part. His criticism of Trump is not what Trump is doing. His criticism is what Trump is not doing. He's not doing enough. Now the problem is Trump is under squeeze from many interests, including within his own party. There are large numbers of people who are against him because they are part of the Uni-Party. They don't want really Trump to succeed and they're working against him. So Trump has to make compromises, that's the nature of politics. But the Trump base does not want those compromises. They want a clean outcome. And Trump has to tell them, look, I'm bound. So Elon Musk fulfills that part of saying what needs to be done, which Trump cannot do, and puts the pressure on Trump. At the same time, he's starting a party. I do not know how serious that is, but my understanding of it is very simple. Once he starts, and he has the funds, once he starts, he will be pushing agendas, which others will be forced to respond to and maybe match. If they don't, his agendas will then fund the people aligned to that, within Trump's party or otherwise, doesn't matter. It's not about party winning. Remember, Trump's agenda is not a party agenda. It's an America agenda. It's a world agenda. Elon Musk's agenda is not America agenda. It's humanity agenda. It's survival of humanity and the future of humanity. So they're looking outside party limits. And if there are individuals who can do what the party will prevent them from doing, well, fund them. So in a sense, what George Soros is doing to push the leftist and cabal agenda, these people are doing exactly the same thing or want to do exactly the same thing in a different way for the humanity agenda. So I'm all for what Musk is trying. If it succeeds, it's good. If it doesn't, worst case, it'll fold into the larger agenda that Trump has been backing anyway for making America great and for each country then to be great. That's his agenda. And if it succeeds, then even at some point, if that party grows enough, Trump might just say, hey, the Republican Party is not doing enough. All those of us who are aligned to this move into the new party. And why not? That may happen equally. Because rather than fighting opponents within your own party, break out of the party structure. And this brings me to a very important observation that the mother made way back, 1970-71. I don't have the quote exactly, but broadly it was in this direction that the day of party rule is over. And she said somewhere that a time will come when people will laugh at parties. Why should you be bound by a collective interest which is not national interest necessarily? Why cannot you do what is right? And all of us, each one does what is right in best national interest together, and that's our affiliation, irrespective of party structure. But the way the system is built to promote party structures and bind you within party structures. A party can issue a whip. It can say you have to vote in this way, otherwise you're thrown out from the party. This is not acceptable if you're genuine. So there has to be a greater freedom of individuals, but you need the backing of a party to support your electoral process, because you can't manage that on your own. If you're good with elections, generally you're poor in administration. If you're good in administration, you're very poor in elections, because you need to lie, pretend, deceive, create appearances. So there are fundamentally conflicts of interests between the electioneering process versus the actual competence of a person. So can it be done differently? I would rather see Elon Musk's effort at forming a political party, at trying out something different, which, if it succeeds, will actually back the larger agenda that Trump represents, which is not a Republican Party, but American interest and global interest. And if it doesn't, well, it may still indirectly pressure. It's an attempt. Let's see what works. But the whole business of Trump and Elon Musk criticizing each other is not a real, it's a game. It's a game that allows Elon Musk to distance himself sufficiently that those attacks against him can be reduced, and yet he can continue to push the agenda, which is the real agenda, which is not contrary to what Trump is. His criticism is Trump is not doing enough, you need to do much more. So that's where we are. I think this is the background I wanted to leave you with in understanding the current situations and the role of the judiciary, but also with understanding from what Sri Aurobindo had to say about the judicial system as it is today around the world, largely drawing upon the British and the European traditions and its failure. It's very insightful and helps us to perhaps start thinking of what can be done to change, and can there be a superior system. As I said, I'm disappointed because after 100 years, nothing has changed. It shows that there has not been enough pain or enough awakening in the collective consciousness to say, let's change it. Or perhaps the pain is just enough that some suitable leader can pop up and say, I'm going to try to change it. And when that happens, he will have the backing of the masses. I don't know if we are at that point yet, or we need to suffer more before that can happen. So I have not looked at the chat box. Yes, there are many important questions about Trump, and I'm going to have to keep many of these questions for next time because there's quite a large number of questions already. I would request you to leave the questions in the chat box as they are. I will gather them and combine them for next time. But today we have already crossed our time limit. To summarize, you want justice, you want protection, for which you have accepted state and you're willing to pay the state for providing you this. In a sense, this is required as long as humanity still lives by certain crude, coarse animal values, where tomorrow you can have a thief that attacks you for no good reason, and you need that protection and you can't do it yourself. So a system is required for that purpose. The system itself at some point serves its own interest for survival rather than serving you. And that's when it becomes meaningless. The policemen today in India still are feared because they're a remnant of the British police which was there to dominate you. The most powerful person locally is the collector, but he's named collector by the British because his job was collection of taxes. Today he's still collector, but that's not his primary job, to collect taxes. Nevertheless, the terminology and the structure designed for exploitation to take money from you rather than to serve you is still the same. So if he wants to help you, it's not designed to help you. It's not designed to link to you at the common level, common man's level. So they are insulated from you through so many levels. They don't know you, you don't know them, and nothing can ever happen, even if they mean good. So the system itself needs to be recast, restructured, flattened, brought closer to the common people, where the accountability is visible on a day-to-day personal interaction level. Then we will see change. And it's not difficult to do that. But you have to start thinking differently. You cannot continue the British exploitation system and then make it a machine for governance. It does not work. You have to design it for governance and not for exploitation. And this is the same for the justice system. The justice system as it is perverse and rooted in those two weird features which are part of the European value system and European history, but they're so deeply entrenched in the justice system that they make justice itself somehow unjust or ineffective or even perverse. And we have this massive machinery. It's hugely massive. We have literally all over the country more and more law colleges opening, where you're training more and more lawyers who get into the system. They don't have enough money, they don't have enough cases, so they need to feed on cases, and the cases need to be multiplied to keep the whole machinery alive, which serves nothing except feeding itself. The fact that there's been no increase in number of cases resolved is proof that of what I'm saying, that the machine exists for its own exploitation and survival. In New Delhi, just a few days ago, there was a strike by lawyers. Why? Because the place where they had the hearings of check bounce cases was moved somewhere else. So they said, for us to go there, it's too much trouble, and we survive on this. We earn barely 20 to 30,000 rupees per case of check bounce. That was the statement in the news article. Think about what that means. 20 to 30,000 rupees per case. So the more cases they have, the more they make money, and that's what they live for. It's not for justice. It's not for truth. It's not for service to the common man. It's a way of earning money because that's your job. You were trained to be a lawyer. You don't know what else to do. And as a lawyer, what do you really do? You're not here to argue cases to find truth. You just follow procedure. You're trained to follow procedure. That's all you do. Does it really serve? And what's the point of increasing these numbers? And so these are hard questions that need to be reviewed in national interest. None of the politicians will dare to touch this for obvious reasons. The judiciary itself will never question its own incompetence or inefficiency or corruption. It will protect itself. So what happens? The common man burdened with this, eventually there will be some reaction, some overthrow, an empire falls. What form will that be? I don't know. But as a first step, at least understand why it's happening, what is happening, and what are the ways forward. And since we have spoken about justice so much, I wanted to read from the mother something in closing, which is about justice, but it's a different level of justice. You see, there are many insights of Sri Aurobindo. I couldn't read too much at all. It was taking too much time. And one of the examples he gives is, if you live at the level of natural justice, it's pull and push of interests, and you are trying to manage those interests to draw out a certain outcome. That's a certain level. When you move to a higher level, where the justice comes from an ethical or moral value, then you're holding an ideal and trying to organize things around the ideal. So there are two gradations of justice systems. If you see, a lot of the Middle East really is the lower gradation. At a certain time in tribal life, you stole something, your hand was chopped. It's on that level. Here there's an ideal. How can we live for something higher? And you structure something differently. And there the justice is totally different. There are two kinds of justice. There are insights like this you'll find all over in Sri Aurobindo's writings. And please do read and look back at those articles he wrote 100 years ago while he was fighting for India's freedom and awakening India, preparing India for the future that India should be. And there he's telling you these things, warning you about these trends. And he says there that what do you see for the future? It's not going to get any better. So now come to something of the mother. Again, she has several things, but there's a couple of quotes which are relevant here. 1966, 20th November, in response to somebody who writes, "Where is there justice upon earth?" somebody asks. Mother's reply, "Nowhere. Even, and perhaps especially, human justice is not just. Here on earth, justice is replaced by divine grace. Because if divine justice were to be applied, the freedom necessary for evolution could no longer be exercised." Fascinating. If there were divine justice, she says, we wouldn't be able to manage it. It's divine grace that gives you the freedom necessary for evolution. Interesting. So call for grace, not for justice. That's another message that she gives. So I'll read from this. There are several questions. Someone asks, "Why are my thoughts like this to dramatize things and make mountains out of molehills?" Mother's reply, "The unenlightened parts of the being always enjoy doing that." Then the fellow writes, "Please show me the true way of making an effort." Mother, "You must train the will as you would train the muscles, by methodical exercise. Never allow yourself to do something once you have decided not to do it." So it's basic training she is giving. Now the person writes, "Justice, justice, where is justice?" Mother's response, in French, translated into English, "Fool, do not call for justice. That is for the strict consequences of your actions. Only the divine grace can pull you out of your difficulty." Justice as in strict consequences of your actions. So there are other things like this, but I thought these were very interesting because for us particularly, Mother discouraged people from going to courts for this reason, because she said it's a den of falsehood. Nevertheless, sometimes you have to, you don't have a choice. And sometimes not to go to court might be a greater falsehood. But if you go to court, it's a gamble again, and it's a den which is not really set for truth. But in life, where you can, where you feel that something is unjust, circumstances are unjust, or something is not aligned to what you thought would be your worth or was just and right for you, the general advice is don't ask for divine justice or any other justice. Ask rather for divine grace. Grace brings in a different dimension which is complementary to justice, which is much more deep, complete and free, loving. It brings in also this dimension of a compassion, a love, and particularly this aspect, Mother uses the phrase of charity, where it gives more than you deserve. And so in a sense, this is the way forward, and this should be our deeper relationship with the divine. Don't say, I need this or I want this because I deserve it. You don't really know what the full picture is. Rather, ask for the grace. And the grace always gives you more than you deserve. If not for the grace, we would not have what we have, whatever it is. It's because of the grace that all this is there. You, strictly speaking, would never deserve what you have. Even if you've done it with your own effort, still you cannot say you deserve it. Even if something is built from your own effort as it seems to you, accept that as an action of the grace and ask for the grace more than anything else. And the grace will fill you with fullness, with bountifulness, and with all that is necessary for you to outgrow your needs and narrownesses to open to something where much more can flow and fill more joyously and more fulfillingly. Let that be our aspiration for divine grace, for us individually, for the nation, for the country, for the world, for humanity. Because certainly we are not too deserving as a humanity still. Namaste.